and welcome to Zoom with Czarny. In this week's episode, I'll be talking to Danielle Brecker of Empire Indivisible. We have a great conversation about New York State politics and what Indivisible is, how it started, and how you can get involved. I like having these democracy advocacy groups on because there's a large variety, a large flavor of these groups, and I look forward to talking to them every time they come on the program because I always learn something new, and I learned a lot from Danielle. So please stick with me here for that interview a little later. Going on right now, it's February, beginning of February, and things are going pretty good here at the Board of Elections. We're starting to think about inspector classes happening in April and May. We are putting together our polling sites for March. But the most immediate concern is our registration system that we're moving over to NextVote, our new registration vendor. We've been working all month on that, and we hope to be putting the final touches on that early next week. So tune in for Commissioner in the Car to see how that's going, because we'll be talking about that. Well, that's really all that's going on in the political calendar. Petitioning will start later this month. We'll have signature requirements on February 21st. And of course, remember, Change Your Party Day is February 14th, or as I like to call it, Fall in Love with Your Party Day. If you are not a registered Democrat, Republican, working families, or conservatives, but you want to be, now's the time to change. So you can vote in the primary in June, but also sign petitions for the candidates of your choice. So thank you very much, and enjoy my interview with Danielle Brecker of Empire Indivisible. Bye-bye. And I'm back with my good friend, Danielle Brecker of Empire State Indivisible. She's the co-lead organizer of this group. And Danielle, thank you very much for coming back on Zoom with Czarny.
Hi, great to be here. Glad to be here.
So, Danielle, I know we talked a year ago, and, people may be familiar with Indivisibles and what they are, but maybe we should refresh people's memory. What is an Indivisible? How did it start? And what does Empire State Indivisible do?
So Indivisibles came to be after the 2020 election of the former last president, when everybody was obviously very upset. And basically all it was at the time was a PDF that two former legislative staffers wrote about how to hold your elected leaders to account to kind of combat the Trump agenda. And from that, all these groups sprung out of that, that basically their goal was to hold their elected leaders to account. Empire State Indivisible was one of those groups, one of many. There's well over 6,000 groups across the country. Empire State Indivisible was in a unique place because we're in New York City. We cover the whole state, but most of our members are in New York City, and we have Democrats elected, and it was hard. You don't need to kind of hold them to account at the House of Representatives when they're already doing what you want. And we soon found that we had this other thing in New York State, in this New York State Senate, called the Independent Democratic Conference. And that was where we decided to focus and defeating those. So the Independent Democratic Conference, as you know, was Democratic state senators elected as Democrats who caucused with Republicans to obstruct all sorts of legislation from happening in the state. Probably most notable, Roe v. Wade had never been codified in New York State, held up by this group of Democratic senators caucusing with Republicans. So Empire State Indivisible focused there with many other groups, and we were able to defeat those senators, most of those senators, and then get a Senate majority, and then a Senate supermajority, and another supermajority this year. And that's kind of where we're kind of somewhere in the balance of state with a little bit of federal politics. I can't hear.
That's me. 3 years into this pandemic, I still forget to turn on my mute button all the time. But you said Empire Indivisible is mainly in New York City, but you do organize and branch out with the other Indivisibles in New York State. And Indivisibles can be different forms. Like sometimes they're activist groups, Sometimes they're online only, sometimes they're in person only. Sometimes they interact with Democrats, sometimes they don't. Right? I mean, it's a wide variety of different types of groups.
It's just about holding to account. So if you're in some part now, right now, Long Island, if you're in Long Island where you have kind of all Republicans, you're holding them to account. The tactics are different than like what I would do with my representative, but the idea is holding our elected leaders to account because they work for us.
So, speaking of that, you kind of touched on this. It's been about a year since we talked, and New York has had kind of an interesting election year. We had redistricting and everything that happened. And I really think it's kind of a tale of two cities in many ways, because, the governor was reelected. Lee Zeldin was a real danger, I think, as governor. And both houses, Senate and Assembly, were reelected with veto-proof majorities, maybe a little bit lesser than they had, but sizably, it's still about the same. But on our congressional side, we lost 3 or 4 seats. And you mentioned Long Island. We lost. We didn't pick up the seat here in Onondaga that we thought we might have been able to. But then we lost some other seats downstate. So what is Empire, States Indivisible, or your reaction to what happened, what we saw this last year?
I would like to say we were surprised, but I don't think we were. We did a lot of work. We knocked a lot of doors in kind of Westchester, Rockland County kind of area and on Long Island. And, it wasn't the enthused, like the people, the good solid Democrats we talked to were ready, and like they were ready and going to vote, and they were voting on abortion and democracy issues. But it was the other people who just weren't enthusiastic, who just weren't turning out. They weren't excited by the candidates, or they were just tired, fatigued of politics. I'm not quite sure what. And they just didn't go out to vote. And the Republicans turned out to vote for their candidates. So, I don't think we were overly surprised. I think we were thrilled that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. And this may not be the appropriate thing to talk about, but I think my group, I know my group, and I am a state committee person, feel very strongly that the New York State Democratic Party really failed with many of these races, and to support even the governor, who, it was a close race, and there just felt like she wasn't getting that support from the state Democratic Party.
Just for the record, there is no inappropriate subject to talk.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
I'm okay with anything.
Okay,
it's an informational podcast.
Okay,
I'm actually not a member of the state Democratic Committee, and by choice, and it's because I just don't feel in my role as elections commissioner. Yeah. But in a role as a general podcast, we're talking about politics. We got to talk about all these things because they're out there, and I think that they're. I think when people lose races, there's a lot of finger pointing, but that's usually because everybody's to blame. So, especially with these races that were like within single digits, and New York allowed George Santos to be elected,
as well. Yes.
And while we pointed to Democrats, I mean, the Republicans are to blame too. They nominated him twice. So, all of these, pearl clutching that goes on down in Nassau right now about George Santos from the Republican Party. I'm like, well, you nominated him twice.
You clearly didn't vet him very well, or you did vet him and ignored what you heard.
Yeah. And I mean, remember, this isn't a dog catcher position. He's a congressional candidate. He got significant money from the local parties and Republican parties. If they didn't know any of this, then they're just as complicit as anybody else. And if they did, definitely so as well. But so New York, we had this mixed bag, and maybe we're the reason why there's a speaker, Kevin McCarthy, right now. Maybe not. So where do you think we go from here? Now, we're in this legislative session, and again, it does seem that unified, and I use that term loosely, unified Democratic control of the state government is here to stay for a little bit. least for the next 4 years, probably. What do you think? What is Empire State Indivisible focusing on now?
So we basically focus on the state budget as well as democracy issues. That's kind of the two areas we're in. So I'll talk about a little bit about the state budget. So we focus on the state budget. We want a budget that is, just to be blunt, tax the wealthiest New Yorkers to kind of invest in the rest of us who are not the wealthiest New Yorkers. And that's sort of one of our goals. And today, and I know this will air in a few weeks, but today this governor's budget came out, and we were very concerned to see many of the things in the budget, but talking about two that are democracy priorities, or one that was a democracy priority of Empire State Indivisible, was the small donor public matching investment in state elections. So basically, there's a program to do public matching to donors in state elections. And this is a great program to, give small donors and community donors a voice to kind of, it basically, maxes out their donation so they can compete with kind of the big special interest donations, and, really makes candidates who are maybe more grassroots candidates more competitive. So this was a program that we really fought for back in 2019 and 2020. It's been enacted. It started this year with candidates running in the 2024 cycle. And we were hoping the governor was going to put in her budget proposal money to not only set up the staff and the office, but to fund the matching funds for the first cycle. In this budget that came out today, the office and the staff is funded, but there's only about 1/4 of the money for matching funds. And, this is really disappointing. And so one of the things Empire State Indivisible focuses on is kind of lobbying our state, like the state legislators, to do what the governor maybe isn't doing, and pushing for that in the budget. That will be one of those things we're pushing for. There are many others. I haven't had time to read through the whole governor's budget. I don't know if she funded the New York Voting Rights Act that passed last year. There's some things that need funded there. I'm hoping that she did fund them, but if she didn't, that becomes a really great law that does amazing things that is an unfunded mandate.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, I try to talk to my fellow commissioners about this, and people who are supporting democracy efforts. The governor's budget is the first step in this process. There then becomes 2 House bills, one in the Assembly, one in the Senate, and then there's the 3 people in a room negotiations that happen, which are really, representatives of all of the branches of the government coming together. And so, there's plenty of opportunities that if something's not in the budget that you want, that there's going to be hearings, there's going to be opportunities to write your legislators, and I, as a democracy advocate, I can tell you, no matter the governor now, it never seems to be that elections are funded in the way, or aid to county boards or anything like that is in the governor's budget. It almost always comes from the legislature budgets, and there's another step here, right?
I do think it's important to point out, though, that in New York State, the executive branch has more power in the budget negotiation than the legislative branch. And that's that's because of a decision called Silver v. Pataki from few years back. And it basically gives the governor all the power. And that's something else that Empire State Indivisible is working to change. There's a bill called the Budget Equity Act. And basically what that would do is restore a balance of power, how our government is supposed to work, a balance of power between the legislature and the executive in the budget process. It's a constitutional amendment, so it would have to pass in 2 separate cycles and then go on the ballot for New Yorkers to vote on. So we are working probably in the later part of this year to get that passed in this cycle and then the next cycle so it can go on the ballot.
And we've already seen this year a legislature that is, at least in the Senate, pretty independent from the governor on several different things. And we might as well just talk about it again. Is that we had the LaSalle nomination for Supreme Court, for the Court of Appeals for the chairmanship of the chief judge, and just disclosure. I'm totally neutral on that. I didn't take a side in anywhere's But obviously it was a historic thing that the Senate, for the first time ever, shot down a nomination, at least in committee, for the Chief Justice. And now there's a threat of a lawsuit and a lot of the stuff going on. What was Empire State Indivisible's position on that or role?
Yeah, so we were involved in this. We've been involved in this. This is what we've been working on for months now, the end of last year, beginning of this year. We were part of the No to LaSalle coalition. We did not support the nominee LaSalle. We were not happy with that. We spent a lot of time, our members, lobbying our state senators to come out in public opposition. We learned in that process, so I had a change in state senator this year because of redistricting. Both of my former and my new state senator were both publicly opposed. We found in other cases there were a lot of senators who were opposed but didn't want to say it publicly, but we were very involved in that. Now what we would like is for the lawsuit, we want the governor to not sue. We think that's really going against what our government should be based on, a balance of powers, and checking each other. What we would want is the governor to put forth a nominee that we can all support, and a nominee that will take our court in a different direction, away from kind of a conservative court to a more progressive court, frankly, and a court that can be the model and the protection against what I consider, and I think many people consider, a politically radicalized Supreme Court of the United States. I don't expect SCOTUS to do any to protect my rights, because clearly they took my rights away from me this year. So I am looking for my New York State Court of Appeals, the highest court in the land, to protect my rights. And we need a chief judge who, can live up and uplift that mandate.
I'm glad you brought that up, because the last time we talked, it was way before the Dobbs decision, although we all were worried that something like that would come down. But living in a post-Dobbs era is different than what it was, even thinking about it. I mean, and I think even many people had hope, not me, but many people had hope that they would temper their decision on Dobbs, and they just went full throttle and YOLO and just went as far as they could, and continue to act like they're going to continue to go farther. So, but we did just have an equal rights amendment pass here in New York to the Constitution that will be on the ballot in 2024. It doesn't look like Democrats are learning their lesson about constitutional amendments in odd years, so that's good. But how important is that in New York? Because of the Supreme Court.
I mean, it's so I ran for state committee, Democratic state committee this year in June. In May and June, basically. And when I was talking to voters, and obviously I was running when the Dobbs decision happened, it was the only thing I talked about. So I probably talked to 3,000 people in my community, and that was what we talked about. Like, we have to do something. We have to make sure, make sure that it doesn't happen here. Like, the law doesn't, we expand the right and protect ourselves in New York, but also we have to do something like fundamentally within the Democratic Party so we can protect ourselves in the future and change things in the future. It is incredibly important. It is also it's probably the first issue I ever organized on in my life. So it's very important to me. I also will say I'm from Pennsylvania. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and when I was about, I was a teenager when Robert Casey Sr. became governor, and he was a Democratic governor who was anti-choice. And so it was a very frustrating, here I am, a Democrat in this state, and we were happy to have a Democratic governor in what was really a red state at the time, but he was anti-choice. And it very much felt like, this is hurting my rights. And some of the laws he put into place are the laws that were the basis of the Texas laws that eventually turned over Dobbs. So it's so important. And the last thing I will say about this is abortion rights are they're the sign of what's to come. They start there, but then it's gay marriage and, all the different rights that we have and we should have, they're coming for. That's sort of the concern.
So, this is a democracy podcast. That's what I started this for. And we've talked about a lot of the other things that Empire Indivisible is working on, but I know you've been allies in the in changing New York's electoral system, which was pretty bad.
Right.
And in many ways, we've done a lot to change it. I know I've talked to some lawmakers, and we're talking about like, well, what's left to do? I mean, it's all small stuff, and small stuff's important because like we had a big small bill, I guess is a way to call it, is that the wrong church bill that was passed last year that's big in 2024, that's going to save tens of thousands of voters intentions, and that's, even though it sounds like a small thing, tens of thousands of voters are important, especially in these close races that we've seen.
Absolutely.
But so what do you what are some of the things that Empire Indivisible is targeting democracy wise, or are you focusing on that right now?
We have several bills. It's, we did do a lot. One bill that we like and we support is the Democracy Preservation Act. It passed the Senate last year, but didn't pass the Assembly. It's back this year. And basically what it does is it ends contributions from kind of foreign influence or foreign businesses into state elections. So it stops that influence. And then, another big priority is still, even though they failed on the ballot initiatives, is enacting no excuse absentee voting and same-day voter registration in New York, and working to get that done. If it probably will mean another constitutional amendment, but we have to do it, and we have to find out a way to do it so we don't get defeated by, a $40 million spend by Republicans. We have to figure that out. Some other things, as I mentioned, making sure that some of these bills have the funding they need. I would say, I think this is something you definitely want, is Board of Election reform, banning hybrid voting machines that are not secure, restoration of rights for currently incarcerated people. Let's see what else. Oh, and then really interesting, I didn't know this, but I knew that the ballot initiatives, when they're on the ballot, are often really dense and confusing to read. There is a bill about simplifying that language and putting it at like an 8th grade reading level, so everyone can understand it. I would say they're dense and hard to understand. So the idea is make it understandable so people can actually vote for something that they would want if they understood it. So that's kind of where we are. I will also say Empire State Indivisible's one of our core things is just getting New Yorkers engaged in civic life, however that looks for them, like coming out and doing something with us, going to a rally, voting, getting other people to vote, whatever it is, it's just engaging New Yorkers to be involved.
You mentioned BOE reform, and that's actually not something that we're against. We would love some reforms. Yep. We would also love resources, and I think that's one of the things that my caucus is fighting for this year, is that there's such a disparity of resources from county to county, and state aid, which is not in the budget.
I know.
That was released by the governor.
But I'm not surprised.
For capital increases and stuff like that. That's something that we're going to be fighting for.
Because I'm very lucky to live in New York City, where the city has, it's well funded by the city. But that I completely agree. Yeah. It should be funded.
Yeah. So, we're starting to get towards the end of the time that I like to have these podcasts run. I always like to end with the question, what haven't we talked about? What's important out there for either you personally or Empire State Indivisible that you'd like to bring up here up in upstate New York?
Okay. So I'm going to say two things.
Yeah.
First is my personal thing. Is civics education from kindergarten through senior in college for public schools. Actually, I think it should be in all schools, because I had the good fortune of growing up in Pennsylvania, where I had civics education from like 1st grade through my senior year of high school. And I think it made a big difference because I am very engaged, and all my high school classmates are very engaged. And I think that's why. That's one. Second, I want to encourage Democrats across the state to run for party offices, for state committee, district leader, judicial delegate, whatever those are. And it's a little bit different in every county. Run for those offices. It's not, you don't have to invest a lot of money. It's petitioning, it's talking to people and running, and then going to those meetings and making change within the Democratic Party that will lead to a changed how we do things in government.
I mean, that's all great. I don't know if you know this, if you saw our the caucus legislative priorities, but we actually, as a bipartisan wish on from the New York State Elections Commission Association, was we're looking for money for voter outreach because that's one of the things that our counties never give us money for. And so if the state would give money that is tagged for that, then the boards of elections could do a lot more voter outreach than we do right now. And in some boards, it's none because we have $0 for it. So
I will add that to my list of things I asked my state senator and assembly member for.
Oh yeah, well, great, good. We got to keep it. We got to. That's how it's done. You got to talk to your individual, the people who represent you. That is how change happens. So, Danielle, thank you so much for coming back on Zoom with Czarny and spending some time with me today. Where can people find out more about Empire State, Indivisible, or Indivisible as a whole?
Empire State, indivisible.org. It's behind.
I'll throw it in the chat.
And then if you Google Indivisible, I think if you just Google indivisible.org, you'll find Indivisible.
And you can link to, and they have I believe the website has the local individual.
Yeah, it does. And also a lot of really good information about what's happening on the federal level and how to call and talk to your local representatives if you're nervous about it.
Yeah, we didn't really touch on that mess right now, but that's okay. We got a lot of stuff to do here on Thursday. But we've had some podcasts about the mess on the federal level recently as well. So, Danielle, thank you very much for coming on, and I'll see you next year.
Great.
And that was my interview with Danielle Brecker of Empire Indivisible. Great conversation. I was really thankful for her to come on and share her perspective on the New York State budget and everything else, but also the great work that Indivisible is doing in and around everywhere in New York State and throughout the country. So coming up this weekend, I'll be doing a weekly walk on the voter registration forms processed by the Onondaga County Board of Elections in 2022. And then next week, Commissioner in a car that will be on Valentine's Day. I know I'm going to express my love to all of you, but it's also Fall in Love with Your Party Day. That Commissioner in car will be talking about the registration system that we have being put in place to be ready for the upcoming petitions. That's what I'm going to be focusing on. And then and also the upcoming signature requirements that will be published shortly later on that week. And then hopefully the next week's weekly wonk after that next week will be about redistricting with the county ledge and common council districts as we have completed that process and moving on from there. So enjoy the rest of your day, and remember to go to justinczarny.com to subscribe. You'll get all content and election news updates that I put on there. I usually do a post once a day or something like that, and you're getting email. It's always free. I pay for that out of my own pocket. I don't take any money. I don't raise any money. I don't do advertising for it because it's part of my education mission to inform voters about all the things that are going on in Onondaga County and New York State. Thank you very much and enjoy your day. Bye-bye.